After hiding in the basement for 2 months, Kamala and Tomi are finally taking interviews, and now you know why the campaign team preferred the basement treatment. For Kamala, it's less call her daddy and more call her desperate. But here she is on 60 Minutes answering a question about Israel and the Biden-Harris embedded disaster in the Middle East.
But it seems that Prime Minister Netanyahu is not listening.
Well, Bill, the work that we have done has resulted in a number of movements in that region by Israel that were very much prompted by or a result of many things, including our advocacy for what needs to happen in the region.
Can anyone tell us what she was getting at there? Anyone? Bueller? You know, as a general rule, I don't believe in calling female candidates dumb, but rules are meant to be broken. And with Kamala, it's pretty much unavoidable. She might actually just be dumb. And Tim Walz, well, he might actually be dumber.
A lot of people would say they couldn't get away with saying, I'm just too passionate, my grammar's not right, I'm a knucklehead. What do you say to the American people who think, I don't know that I can trust this guy with all those modifications to be the potential commander-in-chief of this country?
Yeah, well, I think they heard me. They heard me the other night speaking passionately about gun violence and misspeaking. And I got to be honest with you, Shannon, I don't think people care whether I used IUI or IVF when we talk about this. What they understand is Donald Trump would resist those things. Look, I speak passionately. I had an entire career, decades before I was in public office. They know, and I'm very proud of my 24 years in service and my record. I have never disparaged someone else in this, but I know that's not what Donald Trump does. They disparage everyone. The personal attacks. I will own up when I misspeak. I will own up when I make a mistake.
Not really, though. Well, if Kamala was woman enough to do an interview on Fox News and get questioned by someone who didn't have a vested interest in kissing her ass, well, her campaign would be dead in the water. We all know it. At least Tim Walz is brave enough to be questioned by our own Shannon Bream. I will give him that. But as for Kamala, well, she's opted for an easier media schedule this week. Important programming note, while Americans in the Southeast were getting pummeled by Hurricane Helene, Kamala was taking a little girl time with Alex Cooper for the Call Her Daddy podcast pre-tape. And listen, I'm not going to clutch my pearls about Call Her Daddy. I'm not a prude. It's just a little tone deaf considering, people are stranded, struggling, and dying in Appalachia. But to be fair, the Call Her Daddy podcast is rather fitting for Kamala, so it makes sense.
Daddy gang, to put it in our TikTok terms. I have seen girls on the street walk up to men and be like, do you know where a tampon goes? Do you know how many tampons we use? Do you even know do you know what a X or Y or Z is of a part of our, and they don't know the answer.
I was the first vice president or president to ever in office go to a reproductive health care clinic, ever.
Wow, someone give her a gold star. People are dying, and they still are, in the aftermath of a hurricane, and your vice president is talking about tampons on a podcast. But to be fair, she's right about some men not knowing where a tampon goes. Just ask Tim Walz, because he put them in the boys' restroom. As for Kamala's other hard-hitting interviews this week, I think they'll backfire because while she does sound dumb in traditional media settings, she sounds phony and dumb doing podcasts and pop culture dish sessions. I can't wait to hear her new accent work, though. Joining me now for our own little dish session, BasedPolitics Co-Founder, Brad Polumbo. All right, Brad, I said it before. We saw the Call Her Daddy interview, and before we're going to see the Stern, the View, all the other stuff she has planned for this week. I think all of these are actually going to backfire. I know there's a lot of conservatives that think she should do more traditional media. I say let her do these stupid podcasts because I think she sounds even worse. But what's your take?
Well, I think anytime we can get Kamala Harris in front of a camera, that's good news for anybody who's not a supporter of Kamala Harris, because she's so prone to word salad. She's so prone to gaffes and awkward statements and rambling. Look, even the New York Times opinion page before she became the nominee ranked her as the least electable potential Biden replacement. And they did that for a reason. They've all now quickly changed their tune, but people know that she's not very good at this. That said, I will say the timing of the Call Her Daddy interview is very bad. The optics, it's very bad to have this going on during Hurricane Helene, but that it may have been pre-taped. They may have released it. She might not have directly controlled that. However, actually going on there, I think, was a smart idea in the sense that it's one of the most popular podcasts in America. It was the second most popular podcast in 2023, second only to Joe Rogan. And it's actually the #1 podcast listened to by women, including a lot of moderate, independent, and Republican women who, frankly, are kind of pissed off at the host right now for having Kamala Harris and somewhat politicizing the podcast. But from Kamala's perspective, it was a chance to speak to those women. Now, did it go well? Not really. There was a lot of cringeworthy content. She's not great in that venue, but it does make sense to me strategically that you would want to target that audience.
Well, I understand that. I don't think that she's hurting with women, though. I think she's hurting with men, black and white men. So I don't know if doing the Call Her Daddy podcast and talking about tampons, I don't know if that really gets the men that she needs to win over. Maybe Trump should go on Call Her Daddy. He's got more of an issue winning over women. So I'm all for it. And, you know, to be fair, they did say on the Call Her Daddy, Alex Cooper said that she would, I believe, invite Trump on if he wanted to have a legitimate conversation about women's rights and all this. There was another funny clip that I actually don't have, but I'm sure you may have saw it, where Kamala and Alex were thinking about, you know, any laws that restrict the bodies of men, and they couldn't come up with any. And then viewers were quick to point out that the draft might be one of the most consequential government, you know, restrictions on a man's body, you know, going to die in one of their endless wars. But strategically, I think going on well and on a highly listened podcast is a good move, except when you're Kamala Harris and you struggle with words and thoughts. But she's obviously, again, not the only person that struggles with words and thoughts. I was really impressed that Tim Walz agreed to go on Fox News. You know, whether you like Fox News or you're a conservative or not, it's highly watched, highly viewed. Tim Walz at least stepped up to the plate to do it. But then when he was questioned on maybe one of the more controversial parts of his abortion message, that didn't go so well for him either. Not when you're dealing with Shannon Bream. Let's take a look at this, and I want your thoughts.
I want to talk about abortion, too, because this came up at the debate. It's been a winning argument for Democrats on many ballots, but I want to clarify what the law is there in Minnesota. Abortion Finder, a website that helps women find access, says abortion is legal throughout pregnancy in Minnesota. There is no ban or limit on abortion in Minnesota based on how far along in a pregnancy you are. You signed the bill that makes it legal through all 9 months. Is that a position you think Democrats should advocate for nationally?
Look, the vice president and I have been clear. The restoration of Roe versus Wade is what we're asking for.
But that
this is
law
a
goes
woman's
far beyond
right
Roe v. Wade.
to make her own choice. The law is very clear. It does not change that. That was been debunked on every occasion.
But
look, this is a.
But let's agree. What you signed is there's not a single limit through 9 months of pregnancy. Roe had a trimester framework that did have limits through the pregnancy. The Minnesota law does not have that.
This puts the decision with the woman and her healthcare providers. The situation we have is when you don't have the ability of healthcare providers to provide that, that's where you end up with a situation like Amanda Zaworski in Texas, where they are afraid to do what's necessary. This doesn't change anything. It puts the decision back on to the woman, to the physicians, and we know that this is simply something to be brought up to be very clear. Donald Trump's asking for a nationwide abortion ban.
Wait, he
and
has
again,
said that
we don't see this as a winning campaign.
He has said repeatedly that he will not sign a national abortion ban. Are you calling that just, it's a flat out lie?
Yes, of course. And Senator Vance has in the past said so too.
So again, didn't answer the question. He didn't want to discuss Minnesota's law, which he got fact-checked on by J.D. Vance at the VP debate last week. But when I'm listening to this and I'm looking at the viewers of Fox News who are Republican primarily, but also Democrat, do you think that helped or hurt him doing that interview?
Well, I think some people, myself included, will give him some credit for going on Fox. I always respect Democrats who go on Fox. I think it's kind of pathetic that Kamala won't do the same. But no, that was a terrible answer. Democrats seem to want to have it all ways. They say, no, we don't support late-term abortion, but also late-term abortions don't happen, but also they're important and necessary, and we do allow them because it's between the doctor and the woman. They're totally incoherent on this question. It shouldn't be that hard for them to say, no, of course, we're pro-choice, we support abortion access, but not at 8 months and 29 days. There has to be some limit. But they can't even say that because the Planned Parenthood wing of their party would revolt. So they end up with this incoherent word salad dance of trying to avoid taking an actual position. But Shannon cooked him. I mean, he's dead to rights. They legalized legalized extreme late-term abortion in Minnesota, and you can argue it's not super common, but it does happen thousands of times per year in the United States, and a lot of Americans, left or right, would be kind of mortified by that. So kudos to her for shining a spotlight on it, because the Democrats' position on abortion is quite radical, and they do seem to be constantly addicted to misrepresenting Donald Trump's position on abortion, which, to be fair, has evolved quite a bit over the years, but his latest position is fairly moderate, actually. But so instead of accepting that and challenging him on it, they just keep saying, but Project 2025, but national abortion ban, and but a bunch of other things that Donald Trump says he doesn't support. And so I think it's telling that they have to obfuscate their own position while misstating their opposition's position, because abortion in one sense is a strong point for Democrats in that a lot of Americans want to preserve some degree of abortion access, but in another extent, it's a weak spot for them because the activist base of their party is so incredibly extreme on the issue, and they're somewhat held hostage to them.
Yeah, watching that interview on Fox News Sunday with Tim Walz, I couldn't help but think, and I said it in my open, but if more Democrats actually did venture into Fox News, and I'm not talking about Jesse Waters or Sean Hannity, I understand why they might not want to do that. I wish they would, but I understand it. But when they won't sit down with the Brett Baiers and the Martha McCallums and the Shannon Breams, who I believe are very fair journalists, maybe lean to the right, but I believe their questions are fair, and I believe that they're pretty honest with their line of questioning. I can't help but think if more Democrats did that, they wouldn't have a base or a party to speak of, because they would get annihilated every single time. I can't imagine Kamala being questioned by Shannon Bream or Brett Baier or any of them. And that's why she never would do a Fox News debate. But, I just can't help but think that maybe somewhere in there, the people that are on the fence, and there can't be many left, seeing these interviews, boy, I can't help but think that they're going to be completely turned off by this ticket. What do you think the chances are? And do you think that it will matter in the polling?
I think any one interview will make a huge difference, especially not one featuring one of the VP candidates, because just frankly speaking, VPs don't often make a huge difference. Very few people vote based on VPs or VP selection. But I do think that this election is going to be so incredibly close that even one thing, even one moment, one viral clip, one specific position could come down to be decisive, because it could come down to single thousands of votes in a few key states. And that's part of why I think Kamala's wise, frankly, to be avoiding tough interviews, because if her positions on things like fracking were actually nailed down, if her record was actually nailed down on her different economic proposals, just exactly what does she believe on abortion or on trans issues? Does she think 5-year-olds can identify as non-binary? Like, if she ever faced any actual tough questioning, she, even in the CNN interview, she'd get the most milquetoast of like pushback or criticism or fact checking, and she would really struggle. If she was actually put in one of these adversarial interviews, I very much think she would crumble. Whereas Trump, I don't think he did very well at the last debate, but he does put himself in these settings. He did a CNN town hall. He's done mainstream media town halls. He's gone on different shows and podcasts. He's putting himself out there a lot more. And I think that does project more strength and more confidence than Kamala, but she's probably behind the scenes in damage limitation mode to some extent, which, who knows? It sort of worked for Joe Biden in 2020, but it's not heartening to see on behalf of the American people, who should have a right to know exactly what their leaders think on every important issue of the day, but unfortunately right now simply don't.
Worked for Joe Biden in 2020 because people were scared of COVID. And it was a good excuse that Biden, in his senile state, couldn't go out and interact with groups of people because of COVID, and we have to be 6 feet apart, and we have to mask up and all that crap. Now, I don't think that VPs generally matter that much, but I'll tell you the reason why I think it does matter. I don't think that the people out there that are still on the fence, I don't think that they can hold their nose and vote for 2 idiots. I think they could maybe vote for 1 idiot, but when you see 2 idiots, I think they're like, geez, this is a circus, man. Like, you got Kamala who can't answer a question, who gives you the word salads about the holistic aspirations of the community, by the community, and then you've got Tim Walz, she's just a knucklehead, and he misspeaks. I just don't think that people that, even if they hate Trump, I don't think they can be like, all right, well, Kamala's kind of an idiot. Tim Walz is an idiot. I don't think they can vote for two idiots, because then our country is going to be run by two idiots. And then whoever is actually running it in the background, who's been running it for the last 4 years and causing all the crap that people are sick of. So I'm kind of thinking that maybe them doing more interviews is going to backfire. But you know what else backfires on Kamala? When the teleprompter goes down. This was her trying her best to come up with words. Let's take a look at this.
Remember his number, 32. Today we got 32 days until the election. So 32 days. 32 days. Okay, we got some business to do. All right. 32 days. And we know we will do it. And this is going to be a very tight race until the very end. We are the underdog, and we know we have some hard work ahead.
She was short-circuiting there. Joe Biden often does that, but that's because of here. Kamala might also have an issue with here, but what do you make of that? I mean, to me, that's terrifying. If she were to be elected president and the prompter goes down and she's in front of an international audience, or, just heaven forbid, she doesn't have a script and she's talking to a world leader, like, what are we going to get here?
Well, it's almost like she wasn't picked for the job of vice president purely based on merit. It's almost like immutable characteristics and demographic traits like her sex and gender and race factored into picking her, rather than her actually being good at politics and doing her job effectively and being a gifted orator or communicator. I mean, Biden literally said, I'll only consider women for vice president, and I am leaning heavily towards a woman of color. And now, I mean, should we be surprised that he didn't exactly end up with a MacArthur Genius Grant awardee? I mean, not really. When you remove merit and you prioritize other factors over, you're not going to get the cream of the crop. And Kamala Harris was considered to be a liability even on the Democratic side, even by, like I mentioned before, the New York Times opinion page. But now that she's the nominee, they're all pretending that was never true. They're pretending she didn't crash and burn in 2020 when she tried to run for president in her own right. But we know that she's not very good at this. She's not very good at politics. She's not charismatic. She's not clever. She's not personable. She's awkward. She's stilted. She's manufactured. She's phony. And her best hope is to simply try to come off as somewhat normal and somewhat stable, and hope that people think Trump is too crazy and too unstable and don't want to risk him again. But the more she gets out there and just crashes and burns like this, the harder it is for people to think that she actually deserves to be at the top of this ticket right now. I mean, is this really the best the Democratic Party can do? Really?
It might be. It might be. I also think that it's not just that she's not a good communicator. There are, candidates on the left and the right who sometimes aren't the best communicators, but they've got a firm grasp on policy. And, I actually think about Governor Ron DeSantis, who had a really hard time during the primaries. He has a solid grasp on the policies. He is an excellent leader. In fact, there's nobody that I trust more in the midst of tragedy, as we've seen with his leadership during hurricane season after hurricane season. I mean, the man is a genius, in my opinion, but he did struggle to break through, maybe because he wasn't as charismatic. Kamala doesn't have charisma, but I don't think that she's very smart. And I don't mean that just because, we call people dumb. I don't mean that just as a dig because I don't personally like her. When you listen to her talk, I don't think she's got a firm grasp on the issues. In that 60 Minutes interview, she was also asked about how she's going to pay for all of her plans, and she couldn't answer except she had to hearken back to one of the repeated lines of small businesses are the backbone of the economy, and I'm a middle class, and the rich are going to pay their fair share, but she doesn't actually know how to explain any of these things. So I don't think she really knows. But I do think that one thing is true. I think Joe Biden hates her. And I'm going to play another clip that in my mind just solidifies that point. I think he's out to get her. Take a look at this.
There have obviously been a number of crises that the country has been facing over the past several days with the hurricane, with the port strike, with the situation in the Middle East. Can you talk about how your vice president, who is running for the presidency, has worked on these crises and what role she has played over the past several days?
Well, I'm in constant contact with her. She's aware we're singing from the same song sheet. She helped pass all the laws that are being employed now. She was a major player in everything we've done, including passage of legislation which we were told we could never pass. And so she's been, and her staff is interlocked with mine in terms of all the things we're doing.
He hates her. He hates her. This is his final act, and it's going to be to destroy Kamala Harris. I personally think he wants her to lose, and I think he wants to look at Nancy Pelosi and Obama and George Clooney, and I think he wants to give them a big middle finger and say, you pushed me out, and you got this, and you lost. But do you think that that's a possibility, that he's really out to tank her election?
I think it's a possibility, but I also question whether he has the mental acuity at this point to really think in any sort of scheme or terms that is like any sort of 3D chess. But I will say that's the worst possible thing he could be saying right now. Kamala is trying to run away from the status quo, even though she's part of this administration. She's trying to say prices are too high and we have a plan to fix it, which is a lie, of course. Her plans would do nothing to address the actual causes of why everything's gotten more expensive, but she's simultaneously trying to run as a change candidate while currently occupying the vice presidency. And no, obviously people will say, well, the vice president doesn't have a lot of power. Sure, but the president does and the executive branch does, and there's not a lot of meaningful daylight in between what they say they believe on the issues. So she keeps saying, we'll fix this when I'm in office. Well, how? And how are you not doing it now? So she keeps trying to run as if she's an outsider. And yet Biden's here reminding everybody, nope, we're simpatico. We're on the same page. I truly don't know whether it's intentional or not, but it is really hilarious because it has to have the people inside Kamala HQ just absolutely pulling their hair out in frustration.
Yeah, I think he's saying, lady, if I'm going down, you're going down with me. The bus is going to reverse right over the both of us. And I personally love this era of Dark Brandon. I do want to talk about Trump for a couple of minutes. He had the big rally, of course, returning to Butler, PA, and he had a really amazing moment where he turned his head and he wanted to finish the speech that got cut short by assassination attempt number 1. But I think Elon Musk being there, I mean, I don't know if you think that moves the scales, but if you think that that's helpful to him, obviously Elon Musk is going to have a big bullseye on his back now for being this outspoken and this firmly in the Trump camp. But, what are your thoughts on this rally and Elon Musk being there? Do you think it makes a difference?
Well, I think this was a powerful rally for him to return to the stage of that horrific assassination attempt. And I do think that's a powerful message. I think having Elon Musk in his corner doesn't hurt. I know he spent a lot of money and he spent a lot of funneled a lot of resources into a super PAC supporting Trump. Heck, I've heard the ads in my car from his PAC. And I do kind of question whether that money is really being funneled towards people that truly know what they're doing, because he created a whole new PAC from scratch. But maybe that's good. Maybe that's outside the box thinking, new ideas. But I do think that Elon Musk has his fans and he has his critics, and people have pretty firm opinions about him at this point. So I think the bigger value add, honestly, could be the resources he's bringing to support Trump. I don't know that Musk himself is going to sway a ton of voters because people kind of have their minds made up about him. But it doesn't hurt to have one of the world's richest people backing your presidential campaign. It simply just can't. I don't know how that can hurt when it comes to resources and a campaign infrastructure.
Well, and he's a genius, too. I mean, I think that that's part of it. To me, thinking about a Trump administration, I think that during Trump's first administration, he had a lot of people in there that shouldn't have been in there. And I think that they really were, in some cases, really detrimental to his administration. He fired a lot of people, whether that was their fault or his fault, we can debate that. But I think having someone like Elon Musk as some kind of an advisor, if nothing else but for actually getting broadband to rural areas with Starlink, which the Biden-Harris administration failed to do and wasted $42 billion with really nothing to show for it, I think that his ingenuity and his innovation would be really helpful to a Trump administration. That's what I hope to see. But I'm wondering what you think Trump should be doing in this last month. What do you think he needs to do to convert those voters that he needs to win this thing on the margins? Is he doing all he can do? Do you see him falling into any traps? We know he's probably not going to do another debate, but what would your advice to his campaign be at this point?
Oh boy, well, that's a big question. I think one thing I wish he would stop doing is stop bringing up 2020. Stop with the "I actually won" shtick. Stop making Republicans putting them in this weird place where they feel like they can't answer that question, or he'll get mad at them. I do think a lot of people are sick of those antics and sick of that. And I think he's got to be more forward focusing. He seems, if you, especially on his Truth Social feed, I feel like he's still doing too many personal vendettas and going after people. Talk about the issues, talk about the border crisis, talk about the cost of living crisis and how you're going to fix them. And I have to say, you may well disagree with me on this, but I think he'd have a stronger position on all of that if he was running on a more reasonable trade policy. I think the huge tariffs he's running on give a lot of concern that he didn't do those kinds of wide-scale tariffs in his first term, and that's part of why things were affordable. And so I think it undercuts his case to return to the strong economy of 2017, 2018, and 2019, in which he mostly governed with traditional free market, fiscally conservative policies, except for some tariffs, but nothing as wide scale as he's proposing now. I think the fact that he's running on such radical trade policies undercuts his ability to say everything was more affordable, because economists and policy experts and journalists can credibly point to these tariffs and say, hey, actually his policies wouldn't necessarily make things better. And I think a lot of people are concerned about those.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you on that at all. I think he might be overpromising when you can't do no tax on tips, no tax on overtime. There was a time where he floated government-funded IVF and fertility treatments. I mean, you can't do all of that. You're starting to sound big government at that point. And then the extreme tariffs. I do believe that, as you mentioned, his first administration, which the Biden-Harris administration kept a lot of those tariffs. So apparently they were, good policy. But I think you're right. Got to be a little bit more reasonable. Pull it back a little bit. I think he needs to resist the urge to exaggerate whenever possible. We know that's his thing. I take what he says with a grain of salt because I know he's a fan of the exaggeration. But I think pulling it back a little bit and being a little bit more moderate on his approach, and then maybe ending some of the personal attacks, I think that would do him well. He's got to win
over. But
he'll
never change. He'll never change.
Yeah, you're probably right about that. I don't think he ever will. But I think someone needs to get in his ear and be like, hey, listen, I know you want to be you, but for these next 30 days, can you be maybe a little bit less you, like turn the dial on you just a little bit, and then let's win an election. And maybe he wants to win that badly that it just might make a difference. I think possibly, but I could be wrong. I'm wondering, as we stand here at the end of the interview, how do you think this is going to shake out? How confident are you? Which way do you think this is going to go? Do you think there's any shot we're going to know the results on election night or even the days following?
Oh gosh, I hope so, but I do somewhat doubt it, given the remaining increase in mail-in ballots and other things like that, and just all the changes to the system, that some of which were restored after 2020, but some of which are still in place. And that's one of the things I think Trump needs to do, is adapt rather than complain about the changes in voting rules. Adapt to them and encourage your side to do it as well, right? Rather than say, oh, it shouldn't be like this. Well, it is like this, so Republicans should make full advantage of it. I really hope we get a comprehensive and quick result. The last thing I want for this country is months more of fighting over who won and sour grapes and legal challenges. That's all just a disastrous headache I really hope we can avoid. But I think it's going to be razor close. I think it will come down to the electoral college vote in just a few states. I think it will be really interesting. What if Kamala loses Pennsylvania by 0.5 percentage of a point, like by 0.5%, and that alone, because they have so many electoral votes there, is enough to cost her the election? She'll have some big regrets about picking Tampon Tim or whatever Trump calls him and not Josh Shapiro. It could really be that close. It could just be a few thousand or tens of thousands of votes in a couple of swing states that decide it. And I really could see it breaking either way.
Yeah, well, her instincts were all wrong on Tim Walz because she thought that if you pick a coach from Minnesota, you're going to win over men. And I think she also thought, hey, listen, I can't have some guy that blows me out of the water on intellect and presentation. I have to pick someone who comes off as more of a buffoon than me because otherwise I'm going to look even worse. But she can sit there now at the top of that ticket and say, I'm dumb, but Tim's a little dumber. And that for her makes her feel good inside. So good for Kamala. Lord help us if she ends up being our president, like literally, Lord help us. But I appreciate you and the conversation. Please come back soon before the election. I would love to have more discussions with you. And thanks so much for taking the time.
Thanks.
Thanks so much. All right, folks. It's an interesting phenomenon. The U.S. government never seems to run out of money for foreign nations or illegal immigrants, but the American people are always SOL. And I have some final thoughts. Joe and Kamala announced $157 million in assistance to the people stranded and struggling in North Carolina. Just kidding, it was Lebanon. And I'll be fair in saying that the federal government has allocated over $137 million to state and local governments impacted by Hurricane Helene. That's great, they need it. But out of the mouth of the administration's own DHS secretary, that FEMA money is drying up and there's not enough of it to get us through hurricane season. And if you're wondering where the hell that money could have gone, well, you'll find it in the dictionary next to the word treason. Yeah, you got it. $640.9 million went towards FEMA-administered funds to aid state and local governments dealing with the invasion of asylum seekers this year. But the White House is pushing back on that naturally because it looks bad to any rational human life form. But too bad we have the tapes.
I mean, it's just categorically false. It is not true. It is a false statement. Biden did not take FEMA relief money to use on migrants. FEMA regional administrators have been meeting with city officials on site to coordinate available federal support from FEMA and other federal agencies. Funding is also available through FEMA's emergency food and shelter program to eligible local governments and non-for-profit organizations upon request to support humanitarian relief for migrants. We'll continue to do what we can as a federal government to support these cities as we rebuild our asylum processing system after.
They always find the money to take care of their future voters. They always find the money to send to foreign nation for their wars or their humanitarian needs. But when it comes to Americans, the budget is just too tight, and it's treason. We pay, and we pay far too much, into a system in the hopes that if something catastrophic were to strike our cities or our towns, that money we paid in could be used to get us back on our feet. These people in Appalachia are desperate, and they aren't asking for too much. And they're Americans, for God's sake. And I really hate to jump to conclusions that the aid ratio or speed of assistance is in any way political. I really don't want to go there. But then we hear crap like this, and well, damn.
Here's my question about North Carolina. You had these killer storms, which, by the way, was a third big story this week.
Yes,
these killer storms. And there's a lot of displacement in western North Carolina. Now, Asheville is a blue dot in that area.
I was going to say, Asheville's
Republican voters there.
Yeah.
But those voters in Asheville are, they're the kind of voters who will figure out a way to vote. They're upscale kind of liberal voters, and they're probably going to figure out a way to vote. I'm not sure a bunch of these folks who've had their homes and lives destroyed elsewhere in western North Carolina in the mountains there are going to be as easy to wrangle for the Trump campaign. So that's I don't know how that's all going to play out, but it's an unpredictable element.
Bottom line is this: the United States government is broke. The national debt is sitting at over $35 trillion. So why the hell are we handing it out to foreign nations, handing it out to illegals, and then leaving our own people in the dust? Better question: if you're a Democrat voter, but this crap still sticks in your craw, what makes you think Kamala, who advocated for taxpayer-funded trans surgeries for detained illegals, would do anything to fix it? This should be your bridge too far. Those are my final thoughts. Please be sure to tune in live tomorrow at 1 p.m. Eastern. Also catch full episodes of this show on Fox Nation at your leisure. Please support the YouTube channel, like and subscribe at Tomi Lahren is Fearless. From Nashville, God bless and take care. Hey, thanks for watching. If you want more of my hottest takes, must-see conversations, and of course, my final thoughts, click here and make sure you subscribe here so you never miss a beat. I'll be here every weekday, and I hope you'll join me.